Good afternoon. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media. Welcome to our webinar on Women in Business, where our panel of speakers will discuss strengthening the role of women leaders in South Africa's business environment. Our webinar today is sponsored by Invincible Valves, Komatsu, Minerals Council South Africa, Pele Green Energy, Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, Sabinet, and Standard Bank. We thank them for their support in making this event possible. Before we get started, please note that we've activated the Q&A for your questions. Please direct any questions to the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. The panelists will answer as many of your questions as possible throughout the discussion. Additionally, the chat feature is enabled for your comments and insights. Look for it right next to the Q&A box. Remember, though, questions should go into the Q&A to ensure they are properly addressed in that section. Please be informed that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to you afterwards. Also, we're broadcasting live on YouTube and the link will be shared in the chat once it becomes accessible. So today's webinar will be facilitated by Marcel Korth, a social impact consultant at Genesis Analytics. He works at the intersection of business and society with a focus on gender equity, human rights, and inclusive development. He's worked across civil society, the UN system, research, and the private sector, most recently in the mining industry. Marcel will facilitate the discussion with our all-female panel consisting of Nicoline Esterhazen, a Senior Associate in Project Finance at Pele Green Energy, Pam du Plessis, the Managing Director of Invincible Valves, Lindeka Dzedze, Head of Strategic Partnerships at Standard Bank Global Markets, Boitumelo Nkomo, a Women in Mining Project Specialist at Minerals Council South Africa, Thandi Nzimande, the CEO of the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund, and finally Simangele Mvalase, the CFO of the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone. I'll hand over now to our facilitator to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Marcel.
Thank you. Thanks, Shannon, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this. Can't hear me?
We can hear you, Marcel.
We, of course, meet in Women's Month, a time that honors the courage and vision of the women who, back in 1956, marched to demand freedom, equality, and dignity. And just as we were warming up for this discussion, we realized we don't want to have these discussions only in Women's Month, because we are here 365 days a year. And really, we hope that what we are discussing today during Women's Month really takes root and, it influences us all throughout the year. These women stood not only for themselves, but for generations to come. Here we are. And the struggle reminds us that advancing women's leadership is part of a much longer journey towards justice. It's much like Maya Angelou said, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. We've got 6 here today, but they really stand, 6 outstanding women, but they really stand for many thousands. We also meet at quite a pivotal moment in terms of gender equality in South African business, because women's representation on boards has improved, yet executive leadership and operational decision-making still lag behind. Large capital shifts in energy and industry are underway, shifts that can either entrench existing gaps or open new doors for women to lead and shape the future. Our policy frameworks for safe, dignified work are stronger than ever. Companies are expected to show tangible operational progress on preventing harassment and discrimination and to report credibly on the impact. So today's discussion then is grounded in South Africa's realities, our progress, our challenges, and our opportunities. It is about moving from inspiration to implementation and from policy to practice. Our panel brings rich experience from energy, finance, mining, manufacturing, industrial development, and of course, the National Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response. Together, we'll explore what is working, where the gaps remain, and what leaders can do right now to create inclusive, safe, and high-impact workplaces and economies. We'll start with Nicolene from Pale Green Energy, who sees great scope to accelerate women's participation in deal teams, construction management, and asset operations. Please also remember as we start, and Shannon has already mentioned that we've activated the Q&A function, and we'll attempt to get back to as many of the questions as possible. Also, please note that the Q&A function will be monitored, and we'll respond to those questions. We are not monitoring whilst we are discussing now the chat function. So let me find my questions then. Nicolene, what has been your experience leading and structuring large-scale energy projects, and what do you think you have had to do to build credibility in a space traditionally dominated by men that probably male counterparts did not have to do?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Marcel, and good afternoon to my fellow panelists as well as to everyone that's attending today. So just to give a bit of background of my Pele journey. So I started at Pele in 2018 as a graduate straight out of university. Since I've joined, I've been involved in almost 20 transactions that ranges from refinancing transactions, acquisitions, corporate finance transactions, but more predominantly project finance transactions. Being involved in these transactions allowed me to show that I'm dedicated, resilient, but I think most importantly, that I'm not afraid to have a voice. Being one of the youngest women in the boardroom, in the room, sitting around the table with these transactions, it has naturally been a challenge to build the credibility. But as I've mentioned, in my view, having resilience, dedication, and most importantly, not afraid to have a voice, it's allowed me to be in the position that I am today and to play the role that I am playing.
Thank you. It stands out to me that I was at the Women in Mining Symposium a short while ago, 1 or 2 weeks ago, and resilience, dedication, determination, were topics that were repeatedly spoken about. And executives in the room were discussing with each other, executive women, I should say, in the room were saying how still, when they walk into meeting rooms, they wonder, should I be the one bringing tea here? Should I be the one taking minutes? And I was saying, some of these questions, no matter how junior they are, men have probably never asked themselves walking into these spaces. So resilience is this ever needed ingredient, and yet it requires so much energy that others who compete for the same spaces probably don't need. I'm curious, Pam, thank you for that, Nicolene. I mean, you've led a valve manufacturing company in a very highly technical and certainly male-dominated sector. And I wonder what your key approaches have been to gaining respect and authority in this space, particularly with customers, but also probably with your own teams and partners across your industry.
Thanks, Marcel. Afternoon, everybody. So for me, the journey has been quite a long road. From 2007, in 2013, we bought the business and I took over as the MD. So for me, it was pretty much to have a deep understanding of the business, first of all, and then of the actual product. So getting the technical aspect of it. So I went along and I studied psychology, first of all, so I could deal with people. Second of all, I studied engineering. which gave me the upper hand. My biggest lesson learned was to keep my mouth shut and listen. So that listening is where I got most of my respect and was able to engage later on, because in the beginning, the guys were talking and actually didn't realize that I understood, because I had armed myself prior to getting there with actual intel and that technical ability. So for me, it was very much, I earned a lot of respect through listening and learning from them, because I come from a very, the old boys club. Our industry is very much the old boys club, and it was very difficult to infiltrate it. But at the end of the day, listening got me there. Thanks.
Thank you, Pam. And where do you see that now? Do you feel, would you say you've arrived at where you wanted to be in terms of positioning yourself in that space? Or do you have a way to go still?
No, I've arrived. I've officially arrived. I can, it's the exact same concept of you said when you walk into a room, into a meeting and wonder. I no longer wonder why I'm there. I know why I'm there.
Awesome. I want to come back to that in a moment.
Sure.
But also Smangele, who is from the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone. I wondered, in your role at the RBIDZ, if that's how you say it fast, how are you seeing women shape and influence industrial development in South Africa, particularly again in what is quite a male-dominated sector?
Thank you so much, Marcel. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to all the panelists and all the lovely ladies that have joined this platform this afternoon. Let me start by saying Happy Women's Month to all the roses in this platform. You are always beautiful. And please remember to ensure that what you are projecting outside, you definitely inside, you are as beautiful as you are outside. So to respond to the question, Marcel, so this is how I see it, that women present a significant role of our population in South Africa, as well as in the workplace. And yet, unfortunately, they still remain very much so unrepresented in leadership and in wealth generation, as well as in ownership in the different businesses. What we do in RBIDZ is what we believe in is that empowering women will economically strengthen families, because we all know here today is that women are always at the very center of our families, communities, and they are that strong pillars within our families. So when we strengthen and empower women, we ultimately are strengthening our families, our communities, as well as ensuring that our nation is resilient. It also creates a balance in terms of participation and inclusivity. So basically, I see women shaping and influencing industrial development through their contributions that they bring as business owners, as employees, as end users, because we all know we can be those customers that are ensuring that we end users of the different basically products and services. So we contribute in all different spheres as women. So how do we women achieve this in male-dominated sectors? We do so by being in the forefront of innovation, bringing diverse perspective, as well as breaking down those gender stereotypes, because they are still definitely out there. So in RBIDZ, we try to champion inclusive growth by integrating women into different strategic sectors. That would be in the manufacturing space, in beneficiation of minerals as well as natural resources, in logistics, construction, as well as agro-processing, just to mention a few, as well as we do have other supplier development programs where we ensure that women are well integrated in those different spaces. Thanks, Marcel.
Thank you, Smangela. Not quite riding on the point that you made around stereotypes, but still picking up on that. Lindega, I wondered, given your experience in mobilizing capital for impactful transactions on the continent, what unique value do you think women leaders bring to negotiating complex investment partnerships?
Thank you, Marcel. You said my name so beautifully, like my dad used to say it. And happy Women's Month, everyone, and all those that are listening. Thank you. I've been smiling and nodding as everyone else has been talking, because it doesn't change. And when Nicolette spoke and she told us fresh out of university in 2018, I realized that I'm in the wrong WhatsApp group because I still reference the standard 6 versus great. So, but I've also enjoyed, Pam, the point you made, you've arrived. Because I think a lot of the work that we do sits with us. It's not easy. And I know with time though, this is when you have to come and back yourself. But in terms of the uniqueness, I'm in the banking space, and it's funny, I'm in a bit of an undefined space at the moment where I work across countries and I work across the division, and trying to navigate solutions that we have not, or challenging ourselves that we have not done before. And one such transaction was done in Kenya, and one was announced last year by the US government in Nigeria. They announced, but we tend to want to do things until all the CPs have been done. We're almost closing that now. What was of interest was that the client was aware of this DFI that we talking to, and they've been talking. They couldn't come to any. They didn't have the structure. And one of the things that I was looking at was what was required for us to actually move forward. And it was not, for me, when I saw partners that we're currently working with from the US who had done something similar in terms of a structure that we had not done, that's the partnership that I actually brought to the bank. Not necessarily easy, but to actually say there's stuff that we know, but also let's actually leave room that there may be things we don't know. That's at a transaction basis. But for me, it also speaks to what we do within our communities. We just partnered with the Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities to usher in Women's Month in South Africa. That was on the 1st of August. All of us, I mobilized, brought my colleagues at ABSA, I brought my colleagues at Standard Bank, brought our clients, SPAR, DHL, Edge Growth. The funny thing for us was when they were talking to us, they were like, they want to do something like this in a month. We're like, it's not feasible. We need, as bankers, we want to have so much lead times. But what was interesting to me, they said, no, we need to do it. And I love it because I'm the kind of person that often builds planes when they're building them. We partnered with the department, all of us, and we actually mobilized, and we had that happening. And we had to bring our institutions. That's not stuff that we do, but of interest. My CEO called me and he says, and when he asked me, and I shared the story that, and I just want to put live examples into this work. The minister was talking and he shared that one of the ladies, she spent the whole day with us, said to her, on a normal day, she sells goods worth about $500. On a good day, 1,500. That day, she made 20,000. But what is the partnership that I'm talking about? It's the intentional partnership with government. But more than that, us as collaborators in the private sector, we all agreed that it shouldn't be once off. So now we've agreed that this is something we want to do yearly. That's also partnerships. That's bringing the ecosystem together. So that's the value that us women, because we're always very good in collaborating and bringing others along. And for me, it was a win-win for us and the government and the participants. That's also partnership. That's the value of bringing in what's required and mobilizing to actually get stuff done. Thank you, Marcel, back to you.
Thank you, Lindega. I want to come back to the perspectives outside of South Africa in just a minute, because you've worked across the continent, and I wonder, to what extent your experiences are different, maybe in different countries. But let me pick up on that in a second. What you've also raised, of course, is the notion of partnerships and working together, across our kind of listed company identities. And one space that I'm familiar with, which is the mining sector, has done that quite well in respect of gender-based violence specifically. And I wonder, Tumi, if you could tell us a little bit, the kind of quintessential male industry that is mining, what shifts and what structural changes have happened in the mining sector over the last couple of years that you've observed? And also, if you want to share a little bit about the mining sector partnership with the Thuthuzela Care Centers, perhaps.
Thank you, Marcel. Yeah, your question is actually very layered. But before I go into my answer, listening to the other panelists respond, what has struck me is that women are resilient. Women do the work that needs to be done to equip themselves, to educate themselves, to upskill themselves. And they also, are also uniquely placed or uniquely gifted to find areas and ways to be innovative. And that begs the question to me to say, then why are we still having this conversation? It's something that boggles my mind all the time. But I guess in your opening statement, as you said, we need to continuously have these questions because you eat an elephant bit by bit. In terms of the mining sector, from the Minerals Council, what we've done is we've leveraged our mobilizing power with as an industry body with our member organizations. And what we've done is look at the state of women in the mining sector and analyzed where the challenges and the blockages still exist that preclude women from, first of all, coming into the sector, once they're in the sector, participating and thriving in the sector. And so looking at those challenges, we came up with a strategy, the Women in Mining Initiative, where as a collective, our member companies, we could work together to address these challenges and ultimately increase the participation of women. When we started on this program, we were sitting at a 12% representation, and 12% considering the fact that it had been since 1996 where women were fully allowed to participate in mining. So working underground, working above ground, the laws that precluded women from working in mining had been repealed. Yet transformation had taken so long to get us to a 12%. I am proud to say, though we still have a long way to go, we have made somewhat of a progress. We're currently sitting at an average of about 19 to 20%. And so this speaks to collaborative efforts, the strength in collaboration. It speaks to the strength in diversity in and of itself to come up with diverse solutions to problems and also to share and learn from one another, which I think this platform that we have today is a great example of that. And an example also that you mentioned of working together to deal and address a particular issue that is endemic in mining. However, not only in mining, across South Africa, but because of how mining is structured, the issue of GBVF. And what we've done is we've partnered as Minerals Council with our member organizations, with the National Prosecuting Authority's soccer unit, as well as with the GBVF Response Fund. And I see Thandi is here today. And through this partnership, what we've done is, again, leaning into our mobilization power, say as an industry that we want to support the Thuthuzela Care Centers. The Thuthuzela Care Centers are one-stop centers that offer psychological support, they offer medical support and assist in the gathering of evidence that is used for prosecution in GBV cases, sexual assault cases, and the like. And these Thuthuzela care centers are stationed across South Africa. And so what we've done through our partnership is to offer financial support to increase the footprint of the Thuthuzela care centers nationwide, and also to provide logistical support where it is necessary. So care packages, hamper packages, and this all goes to ensuring once again that we have sufficient evidence so that cases that go to court, first of all, that cases do get tried in court and that those cases are tried successfully, but also to minimize the secondary victimization of survivors of GBV and offer them the psychological, physical, and medical assistance that they need. And I think that is a really, really, really great example of how collaboration can work, and also how PPPs can also work. Thanks, Marcel.
Thank you. Thanks, Tumi. I really do think it's a great example of how these partnerships can work, as you say. And just a side fact, why these centers are also important and why they actually sit in the NPA. Really, the conviction rate of perpetrators increases almost tenfold in cases that were dealt with through the Thuthuzela care centers versus cases that are dealt outside of the Thuthuzela care center system just through the justice sector. So there is a real need for adequate skills and expertise. And clearly this partnership with the private sector contributes to ultimately an increased conviction rate. As we speaking around gender-based harm and discrimination and violence, Thandi, let me turn to you, and I wondered if you wanted to share with us a little bit from the perspective of the GBVF Fund, what some of the biggest gaps in South Africa's current response to gender-based violence and femicide are, and what you see, of course, the role of the private sector to be in response to those.
No, thank you, Marcel, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm so grateful to be a part of a conversation such as this. We need conversations that address the pressing issues that we face as women in the workplace and in our homes, and indeed in community. Turning to the question that you're asking, Marcel, the biggest gaps in our response is really driven by the fact that we've got really poor implementation and accountability. We've got very well developed legislation. We've got the National Strategic Plan, which really is a fantastic document to inform the efforts around GBV and harassment in the workplace. However, we haven't put sufficient resources towards protection and prevention. Many victims cannot access justice or support, or even just support due to slow and ineffective action from law enforcement courts. I mean, we've got cases that take for so long to come through, and perpetrators end up not being held accountable, which then creates a culture of impunity because there's no accountability. So accountability is a strong, strong part of what we really need to be pushing through as well. Within the sort of private sector, we need to be more coordinated in how we respond to gender-based violence and harassment incidents, which involve our employees, whether at work or in the home environment. We need to be addressing the societal and cultural norms that tend to exacerbate a lot of the problems that we have. We need to be moving from norms that promote toxicity to norms that, for instance, promote positive masculinity. We need to be able to have very supportive environments provided by employers when women are able, where women have adequate access to reporting mechanisms and support thereafter. So one of the things we find is that having reported, women are not then supported and sometimes are actually stigmatized, which then creates an environment which women are reluctant to come and report. One of the programs we have is called the Private Sector Coalition, which assists corporates with a toolkit and a program that seeks to change culture, not purely just the policy, which is where we've tended to end within private sector, but to actually have a consistent engagement conversation that moves to change the very culture of how colleagues interact, such that you prevent sexual abuse and harassment in the workplace. Let me leave it there. Thanks, Marcel.
Thank you. I see Linda.
So, do you see my hand is up?
We'll
Yes.
come to you just in a second, Lindega. But I want to take that opportunity to remind everyone that you can ask questions in the Q&A section. A couple of questions are coming in, and we'll get to those in a second. But over to you, Lindega.
Thank you. Firstly, I just want to salute Thandi, the work that they do. And I also what Boitumelo said. So one of the things I tell people is my biggest flex at Standard Bank is the people that I work with. We've got some amazing individuals. So I am very much aware of this private sector coalition because Bianca, Kirsten have roped us all in, and there's a huge coalition of the willing. And funny enough, the companies she's mentioning, SPAR, Catherine at SPAR, Ratna at Motors, KPMG, ENS, Standard Bank, those are people I rightly then called on for the trade fair. They were there in a heartbeat, and they were on all the calls. And for me, that's crucial. So we're not just coming together we're coming for all the big things that allow us to leave our badges or titles or labels in terms of our employers. And that's crucial. And I know that this work that you guys do, that care center that Boitumelo speaks of, has increased the number of convictions because of the work that you guys do. And I think that's commendable. And then there's something that you also said, you see, when I say speak, I'm at that age, my second point is now escapes me. But I was going to say something about gender-based violence. Even at work the other day, our group CEO and head of culture sent an email to this. And the reason this is important, I always say it's not specific to certain areas. It's in the boardrooms. The stat says 1 out of 5 women, if there's 5 women, one of them has been. It has a direct impact to our GDP in South Africa. I think it's from a productivity perspective, it's about 1.5. We can't afford that. It actually affects everything that we do. And also, for me, there's a case that's stuck in my head, and I'm going to give a shout out to this little girl, Caitlin Ferreira. She was 8 days old when she was S8 and murdered by her dad, Hugo Ferreira. I think if we give them names, they're not just numbers. It's something that's important for us to acknowledge and actually work together. And I love that we have these platforms where everyone else can join in. But I really just wanted to say I commend them for the work that they do. Boitumelo and Thandi, I salute you. And also once more to say that collaboration. And this is the work that we want to highlight on the 29th so that other corporates I was saying to Kirsten and Bianca, don't cook it too much. If it's 60% done, allow others to jump in. We need more. Our country, our continent needs more. And I'm going to share that. I know that ABSA is doing something on positive masculinity because prevention is key, right? And for me, it's a shout out again. I know about this because I work with them. They're like my colleagues. They're doing something in that space. And I wanted to make sure that I can give a shout out to all of them. But back to you, Marcel. Do not allow me because I'll carry on talking. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Lindega. I want to move to one question just now, but really, I think what you're emphasizing, and certainly one thread that's running through our conversation already is certainly partnerships and stepping out of the confines of, as I mentioned early on, of our own companies and even sectors. And I strongly believe that that's one of the next steps to move us forward and have more concerted action and impact. I'm speaking specifically because that's what I work on the topic of gender-based violence, but that of course goes for other areas, for us to achieve gender equality. And there is one question that links to that and links us to what are specific actions. And it's specifically addressed to you, Tumi. And it asks us, what initiatives or lobbying does the Minerals Council do to push more women to become executives in the companies that they work for? We appreciate the fact that more women are becoming engineers, mine overseers, and technical advisors. And now the next step would be to see what could we do to get more women into executive roles. I'm saying it's addressed to Tumi, but I guess it's across our areas of expertise and across sectors. And it really speaks to one of my opening points as well. So we've got women at a certain level, but that level actually is lagging behind. But let me start with Tumi, seeing that it's specifically addressed to you in the mining sector.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Marcel. Yes, and I love that you referred to advocacy and lobbying because that is exactly the core of what Minerals Council does with its member organizations. We have progressed somewhat, but there is a level in terms of representation on occupational levels where we seem to be struggling a little bit. And that is what you've mentioned, executive level, top management, senior management level. Excuse me. And, transformation and change does not happen organically. Transformation and change happens as a result of deliberate attempts, as a result of planning, as a result of being intentional and also being leader-led. And we have recognized this as Minerals Council and its member organizations that we need to be intentional about the work that we do, about seeing women progress from lower levels, progress from middle management, and then progress into your senior level, your top management, as well as ultimately your board level. And so what we are doing now, we've recently revised our Women in Mining strategy, and we have articulated pillars that, amongst other challenges that we are addressing, also speaks to the progression of women. And in the pillars that we have articulated, we talk to diverse talent development, career advancement, and then we also specifically speak to inclusive leadership. So that talks to leaders coming behind our objectives and intentions of advancing women in the workplace. And the conversations that we are having and the type of action and change that we are advocating for amongst our members include integrating diversity and inclusion into companies' core business strategies as well as their values. And this also talks to elevating transformation into the company business strategy, such as having equity committees that are established at the highest level of the organization or the organizational structure, which would then look at policies that are in place, would also facilitate audits to ensure that milestones that are agreed upon in terms of representation across the different occupational levels are achieved. And if they are not achieved, what are the remedial actions, as well as having sponsors at very senior levels to ensure that we do accelerate change, particularly in those levels that we have identified that we are struggling a little bit. This also includes incorporating diversity and equity targets that are tied to KPIs and incentives at an executive level. So in performance conversations, not just at an executive level, but also filtered down across the different areas where you have managers that are responsible for talent hires as well as talent management. Something that is also very key and critical is conducting skills assessment gaps and proactively developing candidates based on organizational diversity plans at all levels. And this would also then be linked to the Department of Labor's employment equity targets. The Department of Labor's employment equity targets give us a very nice roadmap that segmentizes the areas in which we are either overperforming or the areas in which we need to double down a little bit in our efforts. So these are the strategies that we are looking at together as an industry, and we are also advocating for and lobbying for with our industry partners to ensure that we close the gap. We have come somewhat, along in representation, but if you really look at the different occupational levels, you will see that, as you mentioned earlier, there is a layer that is a bit of a challenge. So we are advocating for the adoption of those strategies to ensure that, in the next 5 years, for example, we aren't having the same conversation and we see a significant improvement in representation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tumi. And I want to move on a similar question in a minute to you, Nicolene. But just to see, I mean, there's quite a lot that you've outlined to me, and clearly this is against the backdrop where, women were almost non-existent in the mining sector. The proportion was minute in very specific roles. So clearly that journey is ongoing. What stands out to me is, and that's again to a couple of areas, and it also speaks to one of the questions we are about to get to, is you got to create the environment for women to, first of all, join and come, but then to also be welcome and to create the environments physically, but also otherwise, for women to perform in their roles with the respect they deserve, and be safe. That is, again, physically safe, but also psychologically safe. One area that offers us great potential to elevate more women in that space, of course, is in the energy transition. And I wondered, Nicolene, to what extent in your view, can the energy transition be used as a lever to elevate more women, not just into the space, but into decision-making and deal-making roles?
Thanks, Marcel. And that's a great question. And I think that's also why we are here today, is to answer the question of what can we each do in individual professions to ensure that we empower more women leaders, whether it's in decision-making roles or whether it's in deal-making roles. And for me to answer this question, I want to do a two-part answer. So I want us to focus on the governmental perspective, but also on the private sector perspective. So from the governmental perspective, I am glad to say, specifically in the energy structure, and if we look at the governmental procurement rounds, there is an economic development criteria or evaluation criteria. One of the subsections, and I mean, economic development is quite broad, but it is defined in different sub-elements. But most importantly, within those sub-elements, there is a focus on women development, women ownership, women involvement in terms of management control or management roles, whether it's board levels or senior levels. And within that criteria, you naturally, from a procurement perspective, you make an assumption around that specific criteria evaluation levels. And we all here would say, it's amazing if it's based on what your assumption is. Why not just make the assumption, as an example, that the board consists of all women? That's amazing. Yes, that's what we want. But then we have to balance this with, you have to balance optimism with realism. The optimistic view is, it'll be amazing. Let's ensure the board consists of all women. But on the realistic side, and this is where the private sector comes in, is the assumption that you're making in terms of that criteria. Do you have enough capabilities in-house as a private sector company to make that commitment and to keep that commitment? And that's where the private sector comes in. So from a private sector perspective, it is important to look at, specifically in this example, do we pay enough attention, or do we invest sufficiently in internal leadership development? And do we invest sufficiently in ensuring that we deliver enough resources and capabilities to fulfill the assumption that we can make? And if the answer is no, then what are you doing to correct that? And I cannot speak to what other companies and other private sectors are doing, but from a Pele perspective, we have, from an external perspective, through our sister company, Knowledge Pele, we have programs that we launch in the communities that we operate in that focuses on entrepreneurship development. In addition to that, from an internal perspective, we focus on leadership pipeline development. So what are you doing to ensure that the people that you have within your company can play the certain roles that you make a commitment to when you look at the procurement round? And as an example, and I was happy to play a part in that, I think it was 2 years ago, where there was a program, a leadership training program that Pele launched internally at a company level, where what they did is they brought together existing leaders within the company, but also future prospective leaders within the company to collaborate on developing the leadership pipeline and to collaborate on what does leadership mean within the company and how can we push it out to ensure that it looks towards the broader economy. And to close off the point, and a lot of the panelists spoke to that, it comes down to partnerships. So there has to be purposeful and impactful partnerships between the governmental sector, but also the private sector. And once you've deliberately built that partnership and I've identified what's needed to ensure that that partnership can excel, then transformation and transition will naturally follow.
Thank you. So quite a lot there in terms of the systems that are being put in place. Of course, with the energy transition, it was a fantastic opportunity to do these things, almost from scratch in many ways. Something new being developed. And what you've described is how, there are certain expectations and criteria against which those who want to participate in the space also are being held accountable to. So there's the systems aspect, and then, moving, to really live up to those expectations. Thank you. And the contribution, of course, that then individual companies can make within their own structures. So quite a great opportunity, which is quite different to, say, mining, where, we have 100-and-something year history that, to be honest, is quite the opposite and has entrenched some harmful norms and harmful practices. And I just want to pick up on two questions that link to that from the Q&A section, and they're really for anyone to answer. The first one, I must find them now. So the first one was actually addressed to Pam, or in response to Pam's inputs, but I think it also speaks to others, and that is, we've spoken about the old boys club, and there's so much that comes with it, and the kind of norms, behaviors, networks, opportunities, closed doors, open doors that come with that. But the question here is, I have noticed, this participant says, there's no form of mentorship for women formally. And the question is really what could work? What formal structures are there that you have experience from in terms of mentorship? But it also linked me to a question that I had actually, that I was going to open up the Q&A section with, which clearly happened in a different way than I had anticipated. But I thought, seeing that I'm the only man around here, and being very conscious that men still hold most decision-making power in South Africa's corporate and industrial spaces, if every male executive in your industry had to spend 1 year being mentored by a woman, what impact do you think that would have on their teams, your organization, and maybe beyond? So putting it a little bit on its head. But the questions are really around mentorship and any experiences, lessons learned that you could share. Also, again, in the spirit of this, of us moving into action and ideas that could work in our various spaces. So it's really an open question. Pam's hand is up. Pam?
Yes, Marcel. So I belong to a women's organization, and majority of them come from soft skills. So when I arrive there, it's always like, oh dear, the hooligan has arrived, the one who likes to get dirty. We are talking at the moment with CIFSA, who's the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of South Africa. And we're actually talking at the moment of creating an environment for women to connect on a monthly basis. And then when it comes to mentorship, there's very little that's available. But for me personally, I do a lot of mentoring. So I dedicate 10 hours per week to mentoring ladies in industry. So anybody's more than welcome to contact me. We generally do it maybe once a month or twice a month, depending on the need. But it's definitely, and it's not sector driven. It's purely for uplifting and upskilling women within any industry. Thanks.
Lindecker.
I thought you kept reminding me of
I'm
my
now,
dad.
after what you said early on, I'm now so conscious on how I pronounce your
You
name.
say it so beautifully, and you're using my full name. Actually reminding me of my dad. I think I'm leaning towards Pam because I'm also the agitator. There she goes again, and I love it. There's a question that I'd like to touch on and what is being done. Yes, on mentoring, we have a formal program in Standard Bank. Personally, I do exactly the same as Pam does. Literally, my team is catered at the last afternoon, Friday of every week to just coffees. That I've actually decided now to do a full-on program. I'm launching it. It's Banking on Africa's future, hashtag Banking on Us. It's an intergenerational platform. But there's a solo fellow said a question because I'm always mindful. Every time I get invited to an event, I always ask, what's the so what after? I come here and I have breakfast. I come in and I talk. What's next? What are we going to walk away with? And I think one of the quick things that we decided when we started is that we should have these engagements more because we're women every day, not just on August. It helps to uplift and elevate. But she was talking about, we have all these conversations all the time. We overstimulated with discussions. And I think you're not alone. For me, that is exactly the challenge. And I think we should lean in more towards what is the gap. Yes, we're doing things, but there's clearly a gap. And I think the call to action that with the work that we've even started with the department and bring all partners together, it is creating these collaborative ecosystems. It will depend on where you are from a sector level, but really is to say, if we want to move the dial within the South African context and the continent, we all know what the challenges are. Yes, somebody's doing something here. But for example, if you're talking about funding, if somebody else is doing early stage development, capacitation, and I'm also particularly not very happy because we're always developing women. There's nothing wrong with us. It's the environments that need to actually do that, because then you're instilling as if there's something wrong. We graduate with the same and we kick do well at university. So there isn't, and I wouldn't want to actually put that in somebody's head that something is wrong with you. We overtrained, it's great to mentor because you can't, life lessons, because only women have been through this. And one of the questions that we wanted to flip on its head about women mentoring men, I know I'm jumping around. There was a video that was circulating during 8th of March, which I'll share with this audience, where the lady was interviewing men and asking them all the questions that we get asked. And it was an eye-opener to how eventually they realize, wow, so this is the privilege of being male that they don't realize. Pam said she had to listen a lot. I literally perfected the art of reading the room. It's worked in my favor because I can see who the decision maker is, who has the power, who's shifting the power, because we've had to learn those skills. So somebody else said on the chat, you have to over-prepare. That's just too emotional stuff because we're capable. It's not the capability issue. It's really making sure that even our counterparts are aware, which is why I'm saying that lifting this thing on its head is actually a great idea. That video was stellar. I sent it to my group CEOs and every other person in the bank. And it was actually an eye-opener. They said it never landed quite that way for them. But I think the rooms and spaces, to answer Tolofelo, where we can actually get together and say, this is what we know collectively, what do we shift? And that's the conversation we're having on the 29th. And I'll also share with everyone online so that I don't have social media. I do have LinkedIn. People can jump into that. It's calling all of us. How do we move from research to results? How do we move from isolated efforts to shared accountability? Leave our competitors, our competition. There's a lot more we can do in these matters to actually collaborating. That's the action. And also making sure that men as essential stakeholders in terms of shifting institutional power are in the room. We're not kicking them out. It's actually bringing everyone in the circle. I think for me is really the kind of shift that I'm saying I'm feeling in the air, that there is that appetite, and everyone we've called on is very happy to actually participate. I'm hoping, Tolofela, touched on your question and also some of what you wanted to say, Marcel. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move on to the hands in a second, seeing that there's quite a few and in the interest of time. But just to say my somewhat provocative question earlier on was also informed by the very fact that, here in these spaces, and as I mentioned, I've just come from the Women in Mining Symposium not so long ago, we speak to each other. I'm including myself now. But those who need shifting are often not in the room, and we, I think, need to find ways to reach them better. And the anti-racism movement, has done fantastic work, realizing that it's people looking like me who need to do the work. And there's a lot that we can learn also in terms of gender equity. I'm just going to move through the hands because they are up to me.
Thank you very much, Marcel. I also just wanted to add my 2 cents with regards to the mentorship question. I think so. For starters, from the mining sector, there's an incredible organization. If you are in the mining sector and you do feel that you need to network and also connect with potential mentors, there's an incredible organization called WIMSA. It's a voluntary organization whose primary focus is on mentorship, and they have periodic sessions where they have discussions such as these and other extended discussions that are important to especially early entrants into the mining sector, and also where people share their experiences and how they overcame some of the challenges that they may have faced within the mining sector. So get a hold of WIMSA if you're in mining. Incredible organization to be a part of and to engage with. I think secondly, what I wanted to just touch on is that you might also find that in organizations there are a lot of mentorship opportunities. Perhaps you are not aware of them. I've come across many organizations that speak to having even if it's an informal mentorship program in place. Just look around and see if such opportunities are available. But it doesn't also have to be formal mentorship. Reach out to somebody that you see who could have an impact on your work-life experience, or reach out to somebody who could potentially be a sponsor or a guide in your professional experience, and just have a coffee conversation, organize a coffee conversation and see if you can take that sort of engagement forward. So don't necessarily wait for a formal mentorship opportunity, but we are women, we are innovative. Create an opportunity. People in senior positions, they love hearing how amazing they are. They love hearing somebody who is younger come up to them and say, listen, I've seen you, I've seen the work that you do. Let's have a chat. Please give me some pointers. Then back to, because I am an advocate for women in the mining sector, back to the Minerals Council. One of the key points in our revised strategy also speaks to elevating mentorship and sponsoring programs, advocating for organizations to also invest in these programs. So don't just invest in time speaking about them, but really put your money behind hosting and facilitating such programs, because when we look at the mining sector, a lot of the challenges that we face is the psychological battle that exists as well. When you come into mining, because mining was structured and designed around males and around masculinity, there is a bias that already exists for women coming in, especially in core mining functions. There's stereotypes. You hear things such as women don't belong in mining, and a whole host of things that are absolutely not true. So this does have an impact on a person, women, psychologically, and adds to the challenges that we also need to overcome. So I think it's not just there's a systemic change that needs to happen, a mindset change that needs to happen, that also keeps in mind the psychological battles that women face that preclude them from taking up opportunities, from putting their hands up, from stepping forward. And you might find that they actually don't even need mentorship. Like Lindega said, why do we always feel like we need to empower women? You need to train them extra. You need to do this and you need to do that. So I think, as Lindega said, it is a whole systemic process that needs to be changed and needs to be overhauled. Thanks, myself.
Thanks to me. We're slowly moving towards the end of this discussion, but Smangela and Tandi have their hands up. Smangela?
Thanks, Marcel. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll just respond or add to the question that you asked. I like the one where you wanting to know what would happen or what sort of impact women would bring if they would be mentoring our executives, specifically in my company, in the space that I'm on. So I believe as women, we are creators. We also are cultivators. So we bring that to the table. So it would bring a whole host of advantages if that would happen and if they would allow that to happen. Because we bring the softer side into hardship. So we take things that are meaningless into them being meaningful. That's the gift of us women. So it would be a brighter and a more productive place if we had such mentorships. I believe women are go-getters, hard workers. So even the men that are successful today had mothers that raised them up to be these strong men that they are, and taking up those positions in the different companies and businesses. So it would definitely be very advantageous if that would be done, and I would definitely support that. In terms of the different structures, maybe if the time allows, I will share that, what we have in our company as RBIDZ, the different programs that we have that are definitely supporting women. We are very specific in terms of ensuring that we support our women in business in the different programs, but I hope I will get a chance to share more around that. Thanks, Marcel.
Thanks, Mangela. So I'm glad to hear there are initiatives in various spaces. I mean, we've heard from Pam initially. We've obviously heard from the mining sector. There's also some, these are not comments that everybody can see, but there's really a lot of support that people are also raising with regard to women in mining. And Smangela, as you're also outlining in your spaces. Tandi's hand.
So thank you, Marcel. Just a short contribution really on the question of mentorship and general support in the professional space. And I will use the developmental space as a source for the comment I'm going to make. There is something called asset-based community development, which is a concept that says you always have something in your hand that you too can use. And I'm saying this because whilst we may be speaking in large measure to larger corporations, there may be people who come from smaller spaces who don't have access to the same level of support and structure as others may have. And it's to say, if I need membership, who can I mentor? How do I start that network myself? What can I do where I am? And Boitumelo made the point that the leaders are actually very open and accessible if you ask them. Taking that very small step of just being proactive and approaching a few people. If somebody says no, you know worse off than you were before. But if you don't take that proactive step of putting yourself forward to be mentored, to open that particular door, then you will lose an opportunity which was literally in your hand. So I don't want to repeat any of the other things that have already been said, but I do want to say that there is something about also driving what you've got in your hand. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Thandi. I think that's always a very powerful way of looking at it. There were quite a few comments that said, how do we move beyond the panel discussions to action and sustainable action? And I think starting where we are is one point. But also, before I hand back over to Shannon, starting where we are, starting to have the conversations, with the right people, and sometimes that will include men because they hold the power in the spaces. But also, I think something that's come through very strongly today is also building those partnerships. And building partnerships is actually quite hard. And so I come from a gender-based violence background, and that's my work. But for most people listening today, and I assume for most on this panel, that's not our everyday bread and butter. You are finance people, engineers. Pam said, I work with stuff. I get my hands dirty. So building those partnerships, it's actually harder sometimes than just pulling out what I think will work for today. There's 16 days. We'll put together a 16 days campaign. We'll put up posters, put something, on our lunch room tables. But to move beyond that, and just reminded me, I mean, it's been used 1,000 times, but there is the proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think we are at a point where we realize going fast doesn't work when we speak about gender equality, violence, discrimination in the workplace or outside. But what we really want is to go far. We do want to shift the needle. And we do, I think, all of us here realize that we all have a role to play, even if that's not our everyday bread and butter, and even if Standard Bank or Pele Green Energy, that is not the core of our business. But actually, we do have, a role to play. And there are people who facilitate these partnerships. I mean, Tia, nice to see you again. You've also said, is this not an opportunity for parties to partner and provide training and capacity building? What some discussions I'm having at the moment with a couple of partners is, how do we get senior executives, CEOs, to just deepen their understanding a little bit further so that they ask the right questions of their teams and they request the right information, and they are not happy with posters going up on the 25th of November, but they also know that we want to do more and achieve more. And for that, it does need a bit of training and capacity building, even at that level. So thank you, everyone. I think I've run out of time. Nobody has interrupted me, but I think Shannon is sitting somewhere in the background and hoping to wrap us up. Thank you so much for the time. I think we've all agreed that next time we meet, it shouldn't be to have this kind of a discussion, but maybe we all meet to report on what we've since done in our own little spaces. Or at a grander level, and hopefully build partnerships. Linda, we never got to the question that I was curious about. What are your experiences elsewhere on the continent? But maybe that's for next time. Thank you so much. And back to Shannon.
Thanks, Marcel. And as you said, it does bring us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you, Marcel, for facilitating such an enabling and engaging discussion. And thank you very much to our panelists, Nicolene Esterhazen from Pele Green Energy, Pam Duplessis from Invincible Valves, Lindeka Dzedze from Standard Bank Global Markets, Boitumelo Nkomo from Minerals Council South Africa, Tandine Nzimande from the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund, and Simangele Mvelase from Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone. Thank you so much to our sponsors, Invincible Valves, Komatsu, Minerals Council South Africa, Pele Green Energy, Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, Sabinet, and Standard Bank for their support in making this webinar possible. And finally, thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this discussion on the role of women leaders in South Africa's business environment. We really appreciate your participation. Our next webinar takes place on the 27th of August at 2 p.m. and will focus on the technologies that allow mines to improve their productivity and efficiency levels. The link to register for that event was shared in the chat. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course. And if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you so much for your time. Goodbye.